All right, well, welcome everyone. We are really excited today and this afternoon or evening, wherever this finds you, to have a great session prepared on what is digital transformation anyway. I'm Liz Nerad. I lead digital solutions and transformation at Palladium. Palladium is a global impact firm focused on delivering positive impact around the world. And our team really specializes on how do we use digital technologies appropriately and effectively to accelerate and to deliver on positive impact, whether that be within health, economic growth, humanitarian response, really any sector you name it. Our team is working to support how we better use technologies and also create an enabling environment and strong ecosystems so that digital technologies are accessible and inclusive. So we're excited today to have a great group of panelists here to really dive deep into what is digital transformation anyway. For those of you who have been in the global development sector for some time, you've heard the terms and the evolution from the M days, the M health, the M ag, the M education, to ICT for D, to digital development. Now we're more and more hearing about digital transformation. So we wanted to take this opportunity to dive into what does that even mean? And how does it maybe mean different things to different stakeholders? We also heard this morning, for those of you who've tuned in to some of the other events, one of the deputy USAID administrators said, you know, we need not digital development, we need digital disruption. So there is a call for how we rethink our work so that it is more disruptive and more transformative, really, in achieving the goals that we want to achieve. So I'll start off with introducing our panelists today. I'm really grateful to be here with such a good group of experts and wealth of experience in this space, really from many different countries and many different perspectives. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Yodahe Zemakiel. Yodahe is the Executive Director of the National Identification Program in Ethiopia. He has over 10 years of experience as an automation specialist and technical consultant in various government and non-government roles. He has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Hawassa University in Ethiopia, a master's degree in mechatronics from Universidad de Oviedo, and he's worked as an advisor for the Ethiopian Ministry of Science, Technology, and GIZ. He's currently a technical advisor for many projects under the Prime Minister's office, and he is the executive director of the National Identification Program in Ethiopia. So welcome, Yodahe. Thanks so much for being here. Next, we have Rachel Sivande. Rachel is a Senior Director of Country Outreach for Africa for the Digital Impact Alliance at the UN Foundation, otherwise known as DIAL. Rachel is a specialist in digital development with over 16 years of experience leading digital and data for development initiatives in developing countries. She leads efforts to support African countries to develop digital transformation. She's established Malawi's first technology and innovation hub, the M-Hub, which champions the development of local tech solutions and facilitates digital skills, training, and incubation of emerging innovative entrepreneurs. She's also a Google Scholar, having won Google's Anita Borg Scholarship for outstanding computer science students and holds a PhD in computer science from Rhodes University in South Africa. Thanks so much, Rachel, for joining us all the way from South Africa. Next, we have Nikhil Bhaskar. So Nikhil is a partner at Boston Consulting Group, or otherwise known as BCG, and he's based out of the Silicon Valley office. He works really closely with governments, policymakers, digital health companies to really build innovative digital solutions and identify new models for care that improve access, affordability, quality, and all for the patient experience. In the last several years, he's supported the ecosystem, participants in emerging markets to design interoperable data infrastructure and digital public goods, especially in India, that can significantly impact health outcomes. He's an economist that's really passionate about leveraging digital technology to improve healthcare delivery and believes in the combination of multi-scale digital health data from patients and how it can impact our understanding of prevention and treatment of disease. So thank you, Nikhil, so much for joining us from Silicon Valley. And last but certainly not least, we have Sim Sikut. He's a managing partner of Digital Nation. Sim is, he formerly led the digital government and digital policy area of the government of Estonia for 10 years. He most recently was the government CIO from 2017 to 2022. He set strategy, policy, and steered key initiatives and regulations and policy in the country's digital government, cybersecurity, and connectivity. As a serial entrepreneur in the public sector, he was also one of the founders of Estonia's groundbreaking e-residency program and has been recognized as one of the top 20 most influential people in digital government by Apolitical. He now advises governments, leaders on digital strategy, leadership, and governance, and public sector innovation. And he has a new book that just came out this summer called Digital Government Excellence, Lessons from Effective Digital Leaders. So we're very grateful to have all of you here today with us. The run of show really is going to be a couple of themes that we want to dive into that help us really understand what is digital transformation anyway. So we'll go through that. We want to save some time at the end of the conversation for question and answer. We'll hopefully save about 15 minutes, but we really also encourage you to put any comments in the chat that you're thinking of, any questions, any thing that you'd like to know. We'll try to weave in through the conversation, or we'll save it till the end for our Q&A. So speaking of audience participation, we also want to engage you in helping to define what is digital transformation before I ask our panelists. So my colleague is going to drop into the chat a link to a Jamboard, and I encourage you to grab a sticky note on that Jamboard and put up your comments and your ideas on what is digital transformation. How do you define it? What does it mean to you? You can also see in that we added another section, which is what is not digital transformation. I think sometimes the best way to define something can be by defining what it isn't. So I encourage you to add any comments on, any experience you've had where you're like, that is not digital transformation. We talk about that a lot in my team, the difference between digitization and digitalization or digital transformation. So I'd love to hear other feedback on, how we better communicate what it is, what it isn't. And my teammates will also be kind of filling in some of the feedback we're hearing during this session as well on how we're defining it and what we're learning on that Jamboard that we can share back out with you all at the end of the session. So with that, let's kick off. And, we're just going to get right into it and ask, what is digital transformation anyway? So I want to ask my panelists here, just to kick us off. I'd love to see just by kind of by vote by hand. So thumbs up, thumbs in the middle, thumbs down. Do you like the term digital transformation? Is that something that resonates with you? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Show me with a show of hands here. All right, we got some medium. Okay, we got some thumbs up and some in the middle. So that's great. Maybe we'll do a vote at the end to see if anyone's ideas have changed on that. And so I want to kick us off first and ask you, Sim, and I'm going to ask all the panelists this as well. Give us your definition of what digital transformation means to you. I want you guys to challenge you to do this in less than 10 words or approximately 10 words. We're not going to keep you counting, but not a master's thesis on it by any means. Give us your short definition. And I'd love to also hear an example of where you've seen transformation, where you've seen digital transformation happen. So over to you, Sim, first.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'll keep it simple in 7 words. So changing how we work with digital tools, as simple as that, that's the core of it. Well, the examples, I think, sort of many ones, especially if we talk about governments here, right? So whether from my own native Estonia, let's say how literally every aspect of how the government works has been changed with the help of digital tools to then widening the whole of society. But I mean, we can dive much deeper in the discussion.
Excellent. I like that short and sweet definition. What about for you, Rachel?
I'm not sure I understand.
Siri's telling me she doesn't understand, but hopefully you'll give her an answer that she does understand. Go ahead.
Thanks, Liz. That's a big challenge in 10 words. For me, digital transformation refers to the economic and societal effects. In terms of where I've seen it at play, I'll give the Kenyan example of M-Pesa. Before M-Pesa came through, we had very little numbers of people that were connected or able to transact using digital financial platforms. But today we talk of over 50 million people able to transact financially using their mobile phone. Thank you.
That is a great example, Rachel, a great example at scale also. And really, to Sim's comment about changing the way we do things, it is a huge change in how we do things and a change for the better in how you can access services, payments, etc. So great example. Nikhil, how about over to you? What's your definition and where have you seen it in action?
So Liz, as being true to a consultant, I'll take longer in describing this and maybe pull up a slide as well to say how BCG thinks about digital transformation and how the definitions evolved over the last 30 years in public service delivery. If you allow me to project a slide, then I can use that.
Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So you know, as BCG, the way we think about digital transformation is actually in three waves. The first wave of digital transformation was the automation wave, where you had automation of discrete processes when they moved from offline to online. There was digitization of public records that was available. So unique identifier of citizens, so on and so forth. The second wave in the way we define digital transformation is systems thinking, where you start building systems of disparate technology systems that get connected through technology, and it leads to integration of service delivery. For example, you could just go online, book an appointment for your passport, and your passport gets delivered. And that's what digital transformation in public service delivery was. Or you could book a teleconsultation and get consultation available. The third wave, which we now are seeing in many countries take place, and specifically in India, where I come from, is this digital transformation which enables ecosystems, which catalyzes ecosystems and leads to private and public innovation taking place. And we see this happening at two layers. One is the technology layer, where there's platformization that's happening, where open, modular, and interoperable digital platforms come together to enable seamless service delivery, be it in the case of payments, be it in case of healthcare delivery, or in the case of food being delivered to citizens. And then there is the non-tech governance layer, which comes as part of digital transformation. So this is broadly the three waves of digital transformation that we have seen in the last 3 decades come through, and this is the new open digital ecosystem paradigm of digital transformation that we're walking into. And I would love to give examples as we go along in this session of how it's been truly transformational for countries like India in terms of social outcomes.
Excellent. Thanks, Nikhil. I appreciate, like a true consultant, throwing up a slide to walk us through that and show us those phases. And finally, how about you, Yodahe? How would you define digital transformation, and where can you give an example of where you've seen it in action?
So, no, I really love the previous 3 responses from the panelists, all from different perspectives. Mine is a little bit narrow from my own personal experience of rolling out public digital infrastructure here in Ethiopia. So let me count in 10 words. I have defined it as content, consent, and transactions made efficient and accessible for all. So that's my definition. A good example that in my own day-to-day life that I've seen digital transformation is being able to have 3 meetings in a row in one morning, because I don't have to commute to have a meeting. I can do it in Zoom. This is a good example of digital transformation. People not having to spend hours to see each other face to face to conduct a business that they can easily do online. So that's a good example, especially a very good example in Ethiopia after COVID. It's a big transformation here.
Thank you so much, Yoda. I love that example. That really puts it into context for everyone who's joining this, the fact that we can actually have this session, right, in a hybrid way. I'm here in person in DC at the real event in person, and you know, you're all joining us online, and being able to do that is efficient, is inclusive, and I love that. And I also appreciate sticking to the rules. That was a good way to count to the 10 there. So thank you. So I think we've heard in this example some good, you know, good definitions that have some similarities around doing things in a different way, around inclusive and societal change, around enabling the ecosystems and the phases piece of this, and also then the last definition really on content, consent, efficiency, inclusion. So hopefully those are words that we'll keep coming back to throughout this to develop our shared definition. So I want us to move a little bit and think about, what are the elements involved in digital transformation? I think over the last, especially, since COVID, but, over the last several years, there've really been a proliferation, let's say, of frameworks around approaches for digital transformation, frameworks of really defining what are all the components that make national digital transformation or digital transformation happen. So, my team has kind of scanned who's out there talking about what frameworks around digital transformation, what are those elements, how do we really come up with what the recipe is? And I think, when you're looking at the recipe, there's, a couple of components that are key, I think, that come up over and over again: skills and literacy, policy regulation, the business enabling environment and the incentives around that, infrastructure, and also connectivity and devices, emerging tech, and then also the guardrails, governance, privacy, security aspects, just to name a few. So I wanted to ask you, Rachel, I know that through the Digital Impact Alliance, through DIAL, you just completed a study on Kenya, really looking back over the last 20 years on the drivers of digital transformation. What do you think about the recipe for it? Are those components that I just mentioned everything that it will take? Anything from your research is missing from that? Anything we should take away? What do you think, given all of your breadth of research and experience at DIAL?
Thanks, Liz. Brilliant question. So yes, we have seen that the list you gave, which is skills, policy, regulation, to mention a few, infrastructure, are actually indeed the common levers for digital transformation to happen. I must say that at the Digital Impact Alliance, we have reviewed over 30 frameworks of digital transformation. These included country frameworks, national, regional, continental frameworks, some assessments, toolkits, maturity models, all around digital transformation. Just to mention a few of the frameworks that we reviewed, we looked at, for example, the Kenya Digital Transformation Framework, Rwanda's Digital Transformation Framework. As you'd imagine, it's an exemplar country in Africa. We looked at the framework that Estonia used, the Singaporean Digital Government Blueprint. I mean, I could go on and on, but also just suffices to mention the Africa Union Digital Transformation Strategy, among others. And to your point, yes, some of the most identified terms or concepts that we did find that pinnacle digital transformation frameworks included infrastructure, policy, regulation, skills, management, innovation, to mention a few. So to answer your question, yes, it will take those. However, I wanted to intimate that in doing our work in practice in Sierra Leone, for example, but also through a listening study which we conducted in partnership with our partner Smart Africa in over 10 countries. These included countries like Burkina Faso, Togo, Sierra Leone, just to mention a few. But also from our recent study in understanding what were the drivers of Kenya's digital transformation journey, we've actually discovered that there's actually a little more that is needed to drive digital transformation. And among those, I would highlight political will, which is very salient in that list that you gave, the need for collaboration and coordination among the key foundational elements or drivers for digital transformation. And to your question, is this the recipe for everything it will take? I would say no, because context matters, and this will be very different in various sectors. Should we take any of these things as you asked? Well, definitely yes. And are there any of these levers we should focus on more or intimate on at this point? I would also say yes. I want to intimate that along this journey, we've learned that, for example, digital public infrastructure is fundamental and key. We've identified that there are some key foundational digital public infrastructure or building blocks that should actually be in place for a country to transform digitally. I mean, we've learned a lot from the pandemic. It was a reminder of the importance of digital public infrastructure as one of the key levers for digital transformation to happen. When you look back at the pandemic, you will find that countries that were able to respond faster to the pandemic, both from a digital health perspective, but also from a socio-economic perspective, had some form of digital public infrastructure in place. I'll just finish off by giving you some of those examples to bring it home as to why I'm emphasizing on the digital public infrastructure driver. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we did notice that countries that were using manual payment systems took 35 days longer to deliver their first emergency relief payments as compared to countries that were using e-payment channels. This was a result of the fact that countries that were able to deploy faster had the digital public infrastructure of the payment building block in place. When you look at countries, for example, like South Africa, they were able to leverage existing maternity support messaging system, so building on a digital public infrastructure of messaging to disseminate critical information to the population during the pandemic. Maybe a last example I could give is of Togo, who were able to leverage the election database and mobile payment systems to introduce a cash transfer program. And they were able to deliver relief payments to workers in the form of street vendors, hairdressers, particularly those whose livelihoods were impacted by lockdown measures. So I think in closing, I would say that, yes, all the drivers do apply to enhance digital transformation, but there are certainly some that the world needs to start to focus on, particularly with lessons that we've learned from the pandemic, and digital public infrastructure, particularly with building blocks like ID, payment systems, and data exchange are some of the key building blocks that countries would have to consider in enhancing digital transformation. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks so much, Rachel. You couldn't have teed me up better to ask a similar question to Yodahe, because he leads the National Digital ID Program, which is a foundational digital public infrastructure. And also, what's interesting about Ethiopia's digital transformation journey is really that it's directed out of the Prime Minister's office. So you talked also about political will and that being a piece of the recipe as well. And that's where the team that Yodahe leads sits under and has that direction and has that visibility. So I'd love to ask a similar question to you, Yodahe, as the director of the National Digital ID Program. You are responsible for one of these foundational elements. What do you think about the recipe for digital transformation? Is anything missing from this list? Is there anything else that you want to add that you found as a successful component of how a country digitally transforms?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Digital ID is a digital public infrastructure, one of the digital public infrastructures that Rachel just mentioned, and we consider ourselves as a good digital public good, as a digital public infrastructure, because we're providing identification as a utility, ID services as a utility. That being said, we are at the Prime Minister's office. However, Ethiopian Digital Transformation Office is under the Ministry of Innovation, which is another office, but we work together because, as Rachel mentioned, digital ID is an important foundational element of any digital transformation. So to address your question, Liz, if there is anything missing, you've mentioned skills, you've mentioned policy, you've mentioned infrastructure. These are all important and good. You cannot talk about anything digital without infrastructure, for instance. You would expect, however, that infrastructure is something, a limiting factor in countries, in developing countries, in Africa, or in countries such as ours. Let me tell you one stat. Smartphone penetration, to your surprise, in Ethiopia is at 40%. It's a big number. We're talking about 40 million, at least 40 million smartphones. Mobile network and data, you would think the coverage would be low, but the recent statistics says more than 90% of all geographies in the country are covered by data. So it's not exactly the infrastructure that's missing. We have devices, we have mobile network operators. What is also not missing is we have policy coming out, for instance, in our case, lots of good policies, e-transaction law, new e-transaction law, e-payment policies. A lot of these barriers are now being lifted, etc. But still, there remains a lot to be seen in terms of adoption and usage of digital services and digital exchange. So my personal opinion is, I've seen, for instance, in my country, policy remains the same across all regions. Infrastructure remains the same, urban, rural. There is good coverage. Skill, it's also relatively uniform. So what's missing is not lack of literacy. It's not a policy. It's not infrastructure, because we see in some regions, in some communities in Ethiopia, there is a very high adoption of digital payment, while in some other communities, in some other cultures within the same nation, there is lower adoption. So my personal take is two things could be missing in addition to the above three. The first one is addressing the cultural aspect of resistance to change. If a person is used to calling someone to transfer certain amount of cash, or if a person is used to having cash in their pockets to feel that they have money to get by, and if they have a certain level of mistrust to digital money, to mobile money, if my mobile phone is my wallet, well, people generally have that, resistance to change. So how do we address it? People want, instead of an email memo, people want a paper memo. They feel like they have to touch something, they have to hold something to be able to trust. So that's one element, that resistance to change. Even though the infrastructure is there, the policy is there, people want to hold on to how they do things. That's one element that's missing, so this resistance to change element. And the other one is contextualizing technology. A good example here would be Never is Google's search engine version of South Korea. They use Never, and I heard a good explanation why Google has a very low adoption rate. Search engine is a place where you go to find things, so it needs to have the look and feel of with lots of icons, lots of links, lots of items, etc. in the front page, and Google looks empty. So people just don't like it. The homepage is empty, the homepage is all white, so people think, okay, I'm not going to find what I'm going to search for. So same applies here. You can also compare Facebook Messenger with Tencent QQ. So each community, or at least each nation, needs to have a contextualized user experience, what makes sense, what's a good user interface for a given community. Does not necessarily make a good user experience, does not make a good interface for other communities. So contextualizing communities, because at the end of the day, whatever big digital platform we have, people access it either through a mobile app, either through a USSD app, either through a web application. So the user experience needs, it's not just an end, small component of digital systems, it's a major element, and that's the one that limits adoption. From our own experience, we're trying to roll out a digital mobile app, and kind of resistance we're facing, a lot of it has to do with the user experience and the user interface, not what actually the app can do. That comes second place from my experience.
Excellent. Thank you, Yodahe. I appreciated those comments also around culture and trust. If you were with us for any of the morning sessions today, we talked a lot about trust as well, and in context. And I think that builds on Rachel's comments as well around adding the contextual element to each of this, really understanding the users, understanding the operating environment, the context, usability features as well. That I think sometimes we take for granted, especially as we're growing more and more connected, but we don't maybe actually know all of those components of how things work in different cultures and different contexts. So now that we have talked a little bit about the recipe or the components, and I think we've added a couple pieces to those around political will, around collaboration, commitment, and around context and trust. I want to move us to talk about a question that I often grapple with, and maybe Nikhil, your slide maybe helps me to put it into a little bit more context, how do we go about with transformational change, right? In order, the root of transformational change means changing from multiple angles and perspectives. It means doing things, I think, simultaneously. But as countries plan and as organizations plan, it can be sometimes difficult to think what comes first. What's the sequencing? Is it linear? Are there prerequisites that need to be in place? And is there a stepwise approach for digital transformation? So Nikhil, I'm going to call on you, since you seem to present a very clear sequential and linear framework around transformation, to just ask you, especially in your role as BCG, you support strategy development and planning, budgeting for digital transformation journeys, whether that be at a country level or that be at an organizational level. How do you see it as a progression? Is it linear? Is it sequential? Are there pieces that have to be there in place right away?
That's a great question, Liz, that you ask. As BCG, we have studied multiple digital transformations in the past, and having researched about 70 such transformations, what we feel is that only 30% of digital transformations, be it in the public service delivery context or private sector context, only 30% end up achieving the original outcomes that they had set out for and truly achieving sustainable change. In the context of public service delivery, we see there are three things which are required, which are a must, which can actually change the odds from 30% to 80% success of digital transformations. And the way we lay it out is, at the core, of course, what you need is digital transformation is about technology, and what you need is robust technology infrastructure that facilitates co-creation of service delivery as well as solutions from both the private sector as well as the public sector. In our experience, some of the hardest problems in public social delivery can be solved when both public and private sector come together. So at the foundation, what you need is a strong, robust technology infrastructure. At the second level, what you need is a community, a collaborative community that can transact and collaborate via this platform. And for that, and we've spoken about it a lot of times, what is necessary is trust. And emerging markets, specifically markets like India, are by design low trust societies. They've almost always been cash driven societies. They've been societies where physical interactions were the legacy way of transacting. Moving to a technology and digital way of transactions and interactions requires fundamental trust in the community layer. And finally, what you need as the third step is governance. Laws and rules of the playground that govern the ecosystem, and institutions which are both formal as well as informal that can uphold the rules of the playground, which relate to fair and equitable access to platform and outcomes. A robust data privacy and security rules of the playground, a sustainable financing model, digital ready expertise and talent that's required. So just to summarize, effectively what we see is there are three layers that need to come together for odds of digital transformation to be successful. Layer number one is a robust technology infrastructure. Layer number two is a collaborative community that transacts and collaborates via this platform to create value for all. And number three is laws and rules that govern the ecosystem, both formally and informally, to build a fair and equitable access to the platform and digital infrastructure. Does that answer the question, Liz?
It definitely does. In fact, I see another slide in the making around those three components: robust tech, collaboration, and community, and laws and rules and governance. I think that also is a great segue into getting Sim's perspective on this as government CIO, government CIO for a country that truly is one of the best examples of a truly digital society. Over 99% of the population is connected to internet. The majority of public services are delivered through digital means. Talk us through a little bit about the process and the sequencing of that. I'm especially curious in your perspective of, especially when it comes to the laws and rules component you just mentioned, Nikhil, around you know, how do we put guide rails or guardrails in place for something that we don't really know a lot about yet, especially in emerging tech? Does policy come first, or does access to that tech come first? You know, is it sometimes a little bit chicken and egg? So maybe you can walk us through a little bit about how Estonia, approached it in terms of sequencing and the process, but also in terms of how you grapple with some of those issues when that initial enabler might not be in place, you know, and how do you find that balance and those tension points?
Well, I think Estonia's own journey, in a way, by this point is even a bit of, let's say, poor indicator of sorts, because we started 25 years back. Life was sort of quite sort of different in that sense, and then, like, you know, we were as pioneers were sort of, let's say, trying to cross the river without feeling for the stones, right? So I mean, there was a lot of, let's say, sort of like touching and feeling going on in terms of, let's say, what's the way about it? And I mean, just let's say, like Rachel pointed out, and I think Nikhil's point as well. So I mean, we really started from let's say, putting in place the building blocks, the laws and stuff at first. These days, I don't think governments have this luxury, and we see this clearly working with clients of ours. Like you kindly mentioned, Lisa, I mean, these days we in Digital Nation, we advise governments around the world in terms of how to teach this stuff. And for them, for political reasons, for reasons of the electorate being, you know, already hungry for change because they've seen, you know, in other countries how digital can really help people. So they gotta also show some very quick deliverables at wins, as they say, right? So what I see, and what is a lot to my sort of thinking now in terms of the successful roadmap, we've got to balance two things at once. Start building while you start laying the foundations for the longer term and sustainable stuff. Just like Nikhil pointed out, if you just do the quick building stuff, yeah, I mean, you can have flashy things to show off, right? You know, a quick fix to paying the benefits out, or a quick fix to just basically registering your people. But at the same time, if you don't do the long-term stuff, it's not going to last, especially across election cycles. The other way around, the political windows, I still want to emphasize, are so short. So if we've seen several countries trying to do the long-term stuff really well, but if they don't deliver noticeable change immediately, they'll lose the momentum that they actually need to put the long-term stuff in place. Again, whether politically, financially, or otherwise. So that really, to me, sort of sums up the sort of portfolio thinking that whatever you choose, 20, 30, 20, 80, 30, 70, 10, 90, it doesn't matter, but somehow you have to combine those efforts. Work on showing noticeable change immediately, and that gives you the coverage to then to build the long-term foundations in a way. And I want to sort of bring this sort of one more point out here to say that I think there's one more reason why I would sort of emphasize or really advocate for this sort of portfolio approach. And this is really for the reasons that a lot of policy and regulation debate, especially around emerging tech, like you say, Liz, is about like war of faith, belief being thrown out without actually knowing what they're talking about, because nobody knows until you try stuff out. So this is really the beauty of starting to do things, right? Because and trying to build the first services and solutions, for example, even before you have perhaps a full policy in place, because then you have a flesh to the bone saying, hey, look how it can work. What is actually the thing we're talking about? So with AI, for example, in Estonia, we were like early adopters of AI in government. That's how we started. We started really to build these things first, small, narrow, concrete machine learning applications, to then really know what actually needs to be sort of the subject of policy and how to regulate for this and how to go about this. And I think it also helps to really get the momentum of change going, because if it's fight of beliefs, then only showing how different can look like, right, even as a prototype, does the trick in terms of convincing those who are hard against you. So that's a bit of, I think, sort of tactical sort of cleverness, there as well, or wisdom there as well. And my very last point, and just to finish here, look, in the big picture of things, especially in political circles, there's way too much talking and not enough doing. So that to me also speaks about sort of saying, hey, we better start building stuff, offering a new kind of experience as we start laying the foundations, and do the sort of two things at once as much as we can. And we've seen it now again with the clients of ours that it can be done, even if it takes a bit of double effort at first.
Thanks, Tim. I really appreciate that comment around, you know, both thinking about the quick wins, the short term and the long term, and how you can get stakeholders on board for that while also building those foundations that are needed. I think that probably resonates with majority of panelists on this session as well, and thinking about their roles and where they fit into that. I'm going to
add just one thing. Sorry to just briefly interrupt that.
Please.
But I think that there's one element that I've found useful in my work to say that even if you start running, right, both for long-term stuff and the short-term stuff, have a grounded vision in terms of where you want to end up with. I think that really is the beginning point. If that's what we're after in this panel, to say, hey, define what the good future will look like with your counterparts, with your stakeholders, whatever, but fundamentally define it, and then you can have the luxury of doing parallel tracks, because then you're not going wrong, at least.
Exactly. Excellent point. We all have to be on the same road, and then we can go at different paces as long as we're going in the same direction to the same place. I like that. So I'm going to skip us ahead and talk a little bit about the roles of different actors in the ecosystem. And I want to just recognize that, I think we're hearing over and over again, another buzz term besides digital transformation or disruption is the term digital ecosystem. I think what I appreciate and acknowledge about that term is that, it does take multiple actors, multiple perspectives, multiple stakeholders, and really making all the pieces in this ecosystem turn. So I want to ask about the role of three different, actors in this space. First, starting with the role of what the role of sectors is. Then I'll move to development partners and agencies, and then also talk about the private sector. So Nikhil, maybe you can start and kick off this question, as I know you work specifically in digital health. What do you see as the role of sector-specific digital transformation? So digital health transformation, digital government transformation, digital agriculture transformation, when it comes to broad, country-level national digital transformation? Where do they work in parallel? Are there areas where they diverge? How do you see that happening in tandem?
Great question, Liz. And I can speak through from a health context on some of the experiments that we have done back in India, where we have used digital public goods, digital infrastructure as templates for innovation to improve access, affordability, and quality of care. And we have truly tried to solve some of the hardest problems which the government in the last 60 years was finding it difficult, and using some of these digital public goods has actually fundamentally changed the way access and affordability for care is provided. Let me illustrate this with an example. India has every year about 25 million babies who are born in India, and they need to be vaccinated. So India has a vaccination program that has about 30 to 40,000 vaccination centers to vaccinate these 25 million babies. And as a country, India does a good job at vaccinating these. In some years, we're able to vaccinate about 23 million babies. In some years, it's 4 million. Some years, it's also 25 million. And this was going on for a very long period of time until COVID came about, when as a country, India was doing 25 million vaccinations in a single day, in a single week, and many times in a few hours as well, through the same 40,000 vaccination centers. So the question to ask is, how did the same 30 to 40,000 vaccination centers in India create a 50 to 200x productivity gain without any additional investment in the physical infrastructure? And this happened actually by re-looking at care delivery paradigm through a very different lens of building a very small network of digital public goods that streamline the way patients move in the ecosystem, the way information gets exchanged in the ecosystem, and the way money is transacted in the ecosystem. And India's example or our success with CoWIN and building digital public goods, which work as an infrastructural layer and allow private sector to build innovations on top, which can then improve access to care, have truly created this successful examples of 50 to 200x productivity gains in the same physical infrastructure with limited frugal investments from the government, but very specific targeted investments that are done to build digital public goods and digital transformation. And this is one example which truly stands out. And there are similar such examples in financial services, in other places as well, that we have seen where this has worked. Does this answer, Liz, and provide context to how within a sector, a digital transformation in public good as a real world case?
Yeah, I think so. And that example paints kind of a good example of where the two pieces come together, right? Because the sector perhaps provided the use case, but the foundation was already there for DPI, and it really just, you know, came in and built on each other. So it's a great example. Let's shift to the development partners and agencies. I'd love to hear, Yodahe, from your experience in leading, you know, the components of the digital transformation in Ethiopia, the role of the role that you see development agencies, whether it be, you know, multilateral or unilateral funders, what do they play in digital transformation? Where could they be playing, you know, a stronger role, or, you know, where do we give kudos to where they're playing now?
Keyword when it comes to development partners would be capacity building. So teach a man how to fish, right? Do not serve him or hurt the fish. So teach them how to build apps, show the skills, show the how to build a good regulation, how to build a good policy around something, but not do it yourself or you'll disrupt the market, right? So it's as far as the development partners that we're working with, it's a good practice that I have. Most of them do help us in building a good policy framework or building capacity or skills. But you know, it's always a bad idea to be the one building the actual product. So when that development partner, when the direct support is not there, then there is a big gap. Market is disrupted. So that's something, a good pitfall to avoid.
I like that, capacity building, and don't actually build the products yourselves. Rachel, how about over to you and your experience? I know you've worked a lot within this space with, you know, with UN Foundation, you've worked on USAID funded projects. What do you see as the key role that development partners and agencies can play in digital transformation?
Thanks, Liz. A number of lessons that we've learned in terms of the role of development partners. I think I'd say number one is to ensure that they are co-creating digital transformation. Context is key. It's important to understand what the countries want, because they do know what they want and they have a better sense of how digital transformation can be done. And it's important for development partners to understand that they are there to provide support, to co-create what would work for that particular context, and not necessarily to copy and paste or import what has worked elsewhere and think that it'll probably work. I mean, we've seen examples of how, for example, if you look at the mobile money concept, working in one country because they've got a culture of sending money home, but not necessarily taking off in another country because the context is different. I think another important aspect for consideration for development partners is to coordinate amongst themselves. We've seen a lot of siloed funding, siloed and fragmented implementation of digital transformation initiatives, which leads to lack of scalability and interoperability of some of these digital transformation initiatives. And so I'd recommend that it's good to coordinate. It's good to consider a whole of government approach or supporting a whole of society approach towards digital transformation rather than taking a very siloed and narrowed implementation. I think lastly, I would say that it's important for them to understand the element of enhanced peer learning. We have learned that countries actually learn best from each other on how digital transformation is done. And to the point made earlier by Yohad, it's important to build technical capacities. It enhances sustenance of these digital transformation initiatives, but also their maintenance beyond donor-funded projects, which, as we know, often are very time limited. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I really appreciate bringing that piece up about context again. I think that's key in really everything we're discussing. So quickly, I want to talk about the last ecosystem actor in this space we wanted to touch on, certainly recognizing there are many other actors in this space that we're not touching on in the conversation, but really thinking about the role of private sector. And I want to direct this to you, Sim. I know that Estonia was very deliberate in how it built the backbone, the backbone of the e-government architecture to enable those highways, enable that infrastructure for private sector systems and components to fit in. I'm sure that's not the only way that you all thought about engaging private sector, but I'd love to hear from your perspective, especially knowing that this journey has happened over the time period that it's happened. What do you see as the pivotal role of private sector in advancing national digital transformation?
Yeah, well, there's quite a few angles to that part. So you're spot on, Liz, that actually Estonia, even our digital government, right, was really built hand in hand with the private sector folks. That was for a few reasons. I mean, first of all, well, especially back in the day, we couldn't afford the best ones on government payroll, right? So that was a way to basically leverage the talent out there. But it was also like a conscious measure of policy, if you wish, to then say, hey, look, let's rather work with the wider ecosystem, because then hopefully actually there can be spillover to them gaining expertise and then taking it to other countries like they're now doing in 120 countries around the world. It's also a bit of, let's say, industrial policy touch to that, if you wish. Mm. But I think through the years, it has become more complex even, right? So the reasons why we built up our digital public goods, even the way we did, and really just make sure that the private sector indeed can chip in. Well, one part is really that the ethos has been that we don't just build a government, we're building a society. So we're building exactly the building blocks like digital ID even, right? Or stuff like that for the whole of a country to go digital. And that means that we best engage also the wider sort of ecosystem with us on that journey. A second point has been still going to the point that I very much see that in most of the governments around the world, we don't still have the luxury of having all the best ones with us immediately in our staff, right? So we better be open as much as we can to having them contribute, whether through open data movement, whether through sort of just basically making our stack open to them, whether through good vendor partnerships, all different ways for that. But fundamentally to make the bench longer and really just make sure that we're building the best public services out there. And the third thing, what really informed Estonian logic was to say that, look, even if we are in the business as a government to deliver and offer digital public services, then fundamentally, at least in Estonia, people don't want to come across the government. They just want to get stuff done. So from that point of view, a bank is as good as a front office, digitally speaking, right? To getting the taxes done as can be just like a tax portal online by the government. So this was our way of saying, hey, actually, let's take the beginning of digital public service journey to where people actually are. And that often means in private sector sort of transactions or private sector encounters and their own platforms even, right? So that was a way to basically make the services as seamless as possible, taking them closer and actually allowing more and more private sector to lead and be the beginning point of those journeys. The taxing by the banks is not a random example. That's how, as an entrepreneur now, that's how I do my taxes. Each time I pay a salary, immediately, actually, automatically stuff is done in the tax office in the back end.
Thanks so much, Sim, for that. I think the part about society and thinking about that whole approach is really aligned with a lot of the comments Rachel said. And, I think your comment also about being willing and recognizing capacity can come from other areas is a great point to link to Yurahe's comment also around capacity and the role of development funders in that, but also being open to thinking about how you can augment that capacity with capacity that might exist in private sector companies or products or, people and resources as well. So thank you all for walking through those, really key elements around the ecosystem actors. I want to answer two questions that came in as we have been discussing here. So one of the questions is, and I'll say them both first, and I'll open it to whomever wants to take it on in the remaining 5 minutes that we have. The first question comes from Joe, and it's around how does behavior change fit into digital transformation? Is changing behavior a sign of digital transformation? I love that question. So that's the first one on behavior change. And the second question is, so in some contexts that we work, how do we have guardrails in place when the policy and regulations in that context are not built yet? I think that speaks to some of Sim, what you were getting at. So maybe you can tackle that one first, and I'll give someone else to have a moment to think about how they want to respond to the behavior change question.
I'll be happy to start. So what I was trying to say was not advocating recklessness, but rather to say that, I mean, exactly, as let's start doing stuff at the same time, figuring the big questions around us or the context out. So very concretely, if I use the AI for a second as an example, so we built an AI policy, a framework for ethical use of AI and stuff like that, through the work as we were going daily with different government agencies in terms of building the concrete use cases out in practice. So this was us saying that you consciously basically exactly run into tracks in a way, like I was saying. So the guardrails, in a way, you first build for yourself. It's basically like a code of conduct, like a guideline that you then adopt against the vision that you have for the travel. And then through that, if you see through practice that it actually work with some iteration naturally, then you're actually also much better ground to convince others to say, hey, that should now be the wider approach for everyone. Because now you have also evidence to show it works.
Excellent. Nikhil, what are your thoughts? Or Yodahe first, please.
Yeah, about the guardrails, it's interesting. The policymakers, the politicians, just like the citizens and residents, they have to see first, before they make the policy, what they have to retest, what they have, the appetite has, we have to whet the appetite. Like if you roll out this digital platform, this is a benefit. So they have to see a little bit of that transformational aspect. I mean, you need to have personal data, a little bit of personal data before you put out personal data protection policy out there, so that you understand that you need to protect that personal data. So it's usually the stairs have to come first, a little bit, a couple of steps of the stairs, then you build the guardrail in parallel with the stairs. If you focus too much on the guardrails, the appetite, and Sim has perfectly described it, that we don't have to be reckless. At the same time, we have to get things done to show that it's transformative.
Thank you. I appreciate that example around data protection. You don't know that you need a policy to protect it if you don't have it and you don't know what it is, right? So there is that combination that goes back and forth there. Nikhil, how about from you?
Yeah, let's very quickly on behavior change, at least in our experiments, and I know we just have 2 minutes left on behavior change. What we saw was it's very difficult to bring about behavior change in heterogeneous societies and countries like India. And the easiest and the fastest way to do it is to realign incentives. And a big incentive in many ways is actually money. So for a lot of public service delivery, instead of paying money on the supply side, if you change money being paid on the demand side, incentives change and behaviors change, and what that leads to is adoption taking place at breakneck speed. For example, just to illustrate this point, is to say that if we have to provide folic acid tablets to pregnant women in tier 4 cities in India, instead of giving money to a healthcare worker to provide those folic acid tablets, if you can actually have the money be given to them once the folic acid tablet is given to the pregnant woman, it just completely changes incentives for them. And a lot of this can then be facilitated through digital public goods of identifying each participant and making sure that there is no leakage or pilferage that takes place in the system. So that was our experiment of changing incentives from supply side to more demand side, and that led to big behavior changes taking place using digital guardrails and infrastructure to avoid leakages.
That's such a great example, Nikhil, and really thinking back to incentives around behavior change. I think that's a big component of any organizational transformation or digital transformation within an organization. And by that, I mean that from community to government to global level. It all starts with aligning those incentives. So thank you for leaving us with that. So we have quickly come to the end of our time, and I wanted to just point you back to our Jamboard, where you guys have been, and our team has been adding in lots of comments on what is digital transformation anyway. So my teammate could pop into the chat, I think, a screenshot of that final version. We have some great content here around what it is and what it isn't. It's not a digital product. It's not an app. It's not copy paste. which I think really brings us back to a lot of the key points that have been mentioned in this, and really, what we started with, which has been around, really the doing things in a different way, leveraging digital tools, thinking about the context and the culture, thinking about the evolution and the ecosystem elements of things. So I hope that this has been an enjoyable and exciting conversation for those of us who have joined online. I think we probably could spend, several more hours or the rest of this session diving in on really what does digital transformation mean anyway. But we'll leave you with that now and leave you with the Jamboard and those comments, and just to say thank you so much to the audience for your engagement and comments in this discussion. But most importantly, thank you so much to my colleagues who joined us very late in the evening on your end, Nikhil, in the afternoon for you. But really grateful to have your experiences and insights in this conversation today. So thank you very much, everyone, and would encourage you to follow up with any of our speakers or with me directly after on any comments or remaining ideas. Would love to hear them from you. But thanks so much for joining, and looking forward to the rest of the sessions together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.